Good morning. We're going to switch our focus in the course. We've mostly been talking about historical context in the state of Texas, and we've been talking about how we as individuals participate in the political system here in the state and the different constraints that are in place that restrain us from either functioning in the way we want to or maybe functioning in as effective way as we can. And we're going to switch to an institutional focus. What that means is now we're going to start looking at the three branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, to see how those different branches also affect the way that we participate. And in particular, in this section, we're going to look at how political elites function within the constraints of the institutional parameters. When we say political elites, we're talking about folks that have been elected to office. We could be talking about senators, we could be talking about people in the House of Representatives, we could be talking about the governor or the lieutenant governor. But what differentiates them from folks like you and me is that they have a different interest in the political system because they are in office. In this section, we're going to be talking in specific about the Texas Legislature. So this is the legislative branch of the state government, and it is bicameral, which means it has two houses. We have a House of Representatives and we have a Senate at the Texas state level. And these folks are elected in various ways throughout different campaigns, and we talked about that last week. So when we think about what legislatures do, the most common thing that comes to mind is passing laws, right? Our Texas legislature only meets every 2 years for 140 days at a time. That's a really short legislative session, and it's really uncommon not to have the legislature meet every year. Texas is unique in that respect. What that means is that all the business of the state needs to be done once every 2 years for 140 days. That puts immense constraints on members of the legislature in terms of public policy, in terms of what they're able to accomplish, and in terms of providing checks and balances on the governor's office. Because oftentimes, the legislature simply isn't in session when the governor is taking action on something. Even though the legislature needs to accomplish all of the business possible within those 140 days, things still happen in the state outside of that session. So think of, for example, Hurricane Harvey, right? When a hurricane hits, you need immediate response. You need to get people to safety, you need to make sure that they have food and water and that in general they are surviving. That can't wait for the legislature to go into session. It has to happen now, and so oftentimes the governor is able to act in an unrestricted way because the legislature meets so infrequently. Another thing to keep in mind in terms of kind of restrictions on legislators is that legislators are handicapped by having too many bills and resolutions to consider in a short biennial session. What that means is that because they only meet every 2 years, legislators can't devote as much time or energy to each issue as you might expect. They have a lot to get through, and so items often just get a cursory glance before they're voted on. Legislators are also constrained by aggressive lobbying. We talked about interest groups a few weeks ago. And these interest groups are alive and well and functioning in Austin during the legislative session. And so not only are there many bills and resolutions to consider, but the legislator also has to balance the different interest groups that are interested in meeting with them and providing them information on a particular policy area. Legislators are also constrained by having little public support. So at the national level, there was a study done in 2013 that found that Congress is less popular than Genghis Khan, lice, carnies, and cockroaches. That's not very popular. Unfortunately, at the state level, they're even less popular. And so what that means is even when legislators, senators, or representatives try to make a stand, oftentimes they're met with silence from the public at best and opposition at worst. Finally, legislators are constrained by the need to campaign continuously. Most legislators want to be reelected, they want to be incumbents, and in order to do that, they need to constantly be thinking about the next campaign. and how their actions today will affect their next campaign. So even though they may want to vote a certain way on a bill, if they know that their constituents aren't going to be in favor of it and that it may hurt them in the next election campaign, they may instead vote the way the constituents would want in order to retain that small amount of public support. What that potentially means is that we aren't getting the best public policies that are available to us. So as we're going through this week, I want you to think about how closely the Texas legislature represents or aligns with kind of the ideal of democracy. So if you were going to have an ideal legislative branch in a democracy, would it look like the Texas legislature, or would it look like something else? And if it would look like something else, what would it look like? There's many other things to consider in this particular chapter, and I have no doubt that you're going to come up with questions and a lot of critical thinking during this module. So feel free to reach out, continue those good discussions, and let's be sure that we stay on track for the semester. Have a great week.